All right, here we are. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening on this fun Tuesday night, because in 1 week we have a certain book publishing, and then the week after that we have another book publishing. But to begin here, I'm just going to say thank you to Naomi Novik and Terry Brooks for joining this Del Rey Books sanctioned virtual event. It's very exciting. My name is Sean Speakman. I'm the moderator, and I just want to say hi, Terry. Hi, Naomi.
Hello.
Hi. So, yeah, so the way this is going to work, it's a virtual event. Over the last couple of years, I'm sure most of you have attended one of these. This is not new. But for the sake of today, I'll be taking questions from the Zoom stream, the virtual event Zoom stream, and I will be also paying attention to Naomi's Facebook page a little bit too, just to see if any questions pop out there. But feel free to use the Q&A box to ask your questions. That's why we're here, and I'm sure Terry and Naomi are delighted to take those questions, and I'll get through as many as I can, and I will shut up as soon as possible, I promise. For now though, I just want to jump in here real quick and let you guys say hi to each other, because it's been a while, right?
It
Yes.
has. Hi, Naomi.
Hello. Although I'm not sure if I'm like allowed to say this, but I just got invited to dinner with you and your wife when you are here for New York Comic Con. So I'm super excited about that.
I'm extremely excited about it. And I'll tell you that when your book first came out and I had a copy, I read it and I gave it to Judine. And I said, I think you might like this book. It's pretty darn good.
Oh.
She read that book and she immediately said, I want every other book that she has written from here on in. I'm not kidding you. Especially she wanted the Temeraire books. And so I was sent on marching orders to get out there and get them and bring them in and see them. And she has loved those books.
Oh, that's wonderful. That makes me so.
It's nice. I like it when artists I admire turn out to be popular with my family too. It isn't always true, but in this case it is.
Well, as I started saying before we actually came live, I found your books on the shelves in my home. There was an age at which I wasn't actually going to the library or the bookstore on my own. And so my mom had the Sword of Shannara and Elfstones of Shannara on the wall. And I think she thought Elfstones was a little too old for me. It was a little too mature for me, and I disagreed. So I climbed on top of it was one of the books that I climbed on top of the piano to reach when she was not at home. So they were passed on to me in the same way.
Oh, you don't look any the worse for wear because of it. And I'm hoping that's true.
No, I don't think it hurt me. I mean, Clan of the Cave Bear was next to it on the shelf. That might have
okay.
Psychic trauma.
I knew that woman. Judine and I compare stories about growing up because we're both, dyed in the wool book people. And my library experience and hers were entirely different. Her father took her to the library at age 8, I think it was, and said to the librarians, she is to be allowed anywhere she wants in the library. In those days, there were restrictions, you have to be in with the kids, whatever. I, on the other hand, was not given that privilege. So I spent my childhood sneaking into the places that I was not allowed, and then having to thwart the librarian in her efforts to track me down and get me out of there. But it made for some interesting searches, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I think I read Naked and the Dead before most kids my age did.
But I actually feel quite strongly like my husband and I, for our own daughter, we don't censor her reading at all. She read all of my books, slightly before I intended her to. I mean, I kind of wrote some of them for her, but I sort of expected her to be a bit older. But she, again, I always feel like the thing about books, right? The thing about books is it's so engaged. 50% of a book is the readers, 50% of the experience, at least, if not more. It comes from the reader. And a book doesn't work unless you're actively participating, unless you're actively giving it your brain to make images with.
Yes.
And And so I feel very differently about a book as opposed to film or television, right? Where you're sort of, you can't kind of look away. If you close your eyes while you're reading, the book stops.
Right. Well, the impact is entirely different because the impact with movies is so important in the visual level. Movies don't work in the same way if there's only the dialogue. You
Right.
need those visuals, but with books, you're creating the visuals in your mind because
Right.
as you read, at least I do, and I'm sure you do too, as you're reading a book along, you're imagining in your head what everybody looks like, what they're doing at any given time, because that's part of the engagement that you have with books that you don't have anywhere else.
Yeah, and so I do feel like that experience, you can only have I mean, not absolutely, it's true that you can get, when you're deeply engaged with a book, you can certainly have an emotional experience that you're not necessarily quite ready to have. But I think you probably can't conceive of something that you're just completely not able to.
Mhm.
And so I generally feel like my attitude has always been, if there's something that you have questions about, or if there's something that makes you feel uncomfortable, you just close the book and it stops, it's over. And if there's something you have questions about, you come and talk to us, which has occasionally netted me some slightly awkward questions. But
there was some of that expectancy, at least on the part of myself and Judine, but I think on a lot of people, that once you opened a book, you were obliged to read it all the way through. You'd made a commitment, you had to read all the way through. About the time I hit 60, I shoved that one aside and said, I haven't got that many years in my life here. I have too many books out there that I get started with and I think, well, I don't really want to read this book, so I'm putting this out of the way. And too many books I haven't gotten to, and they're overpowering me anyway as time goes on. So I feel you're always entitled to say, this is something I really, really want to get to. And when you find something, I keep talking about T.J. Klune and The House on the Cerulean Sea, which I thought was the most moving book I read all last year. I think it was last year. The COVID thing has ruined my thinking process, but it was so important a book. And it wasn't a big book. It just was sweet and it was lovely. And it had so many good things to say about people and their relationships with each other. And in a way in which you will identify with, this was about a school of orphans who are not quite like you and I, or in fact, anybody else, and an administrator who is sent to examine this school and find out why it's operating. And when he finds out, of course, he is put in a conundrum about how to report it back to his superiors. And in the end, of course, the kids win out and the adults lose.
That's always good.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So are you doing a lot of reading lately?
My reading currently is the top book it's Boats with an Open Mind, which is about the design of yachts. Several other a few other very interesting books. Probably the most interesting is We the Navigators, which is talked about Polynesian traditions of ocean navigation. But it's sort of, I have to say that I feel like my fiction reading has drops off a cliff whenever I'm working really actively on a project, because I just am like, give me nonfiction, right? And so I'm sort of just churning through a ton of nonfiction, which I read in quite different ways increasingly now. Instead of reading from start to finish, I'm very often just mining. I have like a stack of books like this, and I'm trying to mine through them for the little sort of bits,
little snippets of importance.
Right.
Yeah. Well, are you doing, so you're reading in large part for research?
Yeah.
Right. On what are you drifting back in Temeraire country, and we're going to have flying Polynesian ships?
No, there's no. This is the next project is it's called Folly, and I hope it's not.
I don't think it will be.
But so it's a secondary world, and I'm currently. So in fact, all these books are literally for one very short story that's just a prequel that doesn't actually have anything to do with the book project. you know, because sometimes that's how it rolls.
It is.
Like it's gonna the all the research is gonna be like 2 lines of text in the entire story. But it's important. I find that it matters. But so I'm writing about the discovery of a new continent.
That sounds interesting.
So I have to get my people from where they are to this new continent, and you know,
How do they do that? Huh?
right, exactly. So I'm trying to design their boat, and yeah, you know, so
Well,
this may end up be like building a boat somewhere. I don't know.
I have to be careful. I'm writing a book that I'm 3/4 of the way through, roughly, and I think I have about 6, maybe 7 chapters to go. And it's part of the Child of Light series. But I will give something away here by saying that in order to write this book, I have to figure out more than I know at present, learn more than I know at present about mermaids. And that's something we all know very little about, except, you know, in the sense that we've read some stories with mermaids and that's it. But I'm learning a whole lot about mermaid history throughout the world, and writing down the, you know, my approach is to research as much as I can and write down as little as I have to, because I don't want to put in everything I see and turn it into a treatise on mermaids. I just want to get the feeling and the sense of what that would be like and work from there. But I tend to read a lot of fiction when I'm writing, and mostly it's to get away, because I seem to do better with my own writing when I am caught up in somebody else's story. And it just, I don't know, it gives me a relief, I guess, of some sort. And then when I go back, I feel fresher about getting back into whatever I'm writing at the time, except near the end of the book. Then I'm kind of locked in and I have to finish it. And, you know, every waking hour of the day.
Right. And you don't feel like you have voice bleed at all? You know,
I've never had a problem with that, but maybe my books are all the same. I've been recovering the same book for, 30 Shanara books. It's all the same book, and nobody's picked up on that yet. And I worry that at some point someone might know, but if we keep it secret, no one will know that this is true. I don't know about voice bleed. One of the things I like about your work reminds me of my work, and that is that you're really good at taking a subject and writing a series of books and characters, and writing a series of books, as you did with Temeraire, as you did with Uprooted and Silver,
Spinning Silver,
and as you're doing with Deadly Education. Now, see, I like doing that too, because except I got carried away with the Shannon books, I admit. But then I did Magic Kingdom for Sale and Word and Void, and those all worked better because of the fact that they were intermingled along the way in some way, and each one led to something else. And I think for a writer to, and they're very different, and your books are very different. And I think that makes you a better writer for having done that. And I don't see so much of that. I see a lot of people doing the same thing over and over and over again, which after a while, I think it gets harder to sustain. It's like writing a mystery series that never ends. And you want to say, how many more can I tolerate before
you have to start wondering why the police haven't arrested the detective.
Yeah, that's
serial killer, right?
Like that.
It's funny how you always seem to show up and there's dead bodies around. Maybe
the timing is a little coincidental, I'm sure.
Right.
So I really like the fact, and I especially on this new series that you're working on, you managed to avoid all of the comparisons that in my nastiest state I would have laid upon you, such as, oh, another Harry Potter, oh, another whatever. And you escaped all that and wrote something that was entirely fresh. And I congratulate you on that. That's really a terrific job.
For me, it's just, I get bored myself. I sort of, in fact, I actually am hugely impressed that you were able, because you did sustain Shannara, despite the sort of the long, the series where I felt very strongly by the time I landed, I hit Temeraire 9.
Right.
I'm happy, I caveat this. I'm very happy and very proud and very glad that I did it. But in retrospect, I finished book 9. I was like, if I knew what I'd known now, I would have ended it at book 5.
Yeah.
obviously the end of book 5 would have been completely different. But you know, that's the kind of thing you need to do it to learn.
You do.
But I myself, I'm just a butterfly in terms of my attention span,
Yep.
interest
Yep.
level. And I need to be doing something completely different or else I'm not engaged. And I think it's very hard. It's not impossible. It's possible. And I was able to get myself re-engaged in the universe, but it was not a natural thing. It was not sort of a thing that flowed for me. Do you feel that way? Like when you sit down to write a book in a series that you've started, do you feel like you have to put yourself back in it? Because, you know, just to sort of days back, like for instance, with Scholomance, with the Scholomance trilogy, I felt very strongly that that it was one story in my head. And so I didn't have a problem. I basically wrote the whole thing without stopping at any point along the way. Yeah, but
I think that I was in a different time period than you were when I started. The whole fantasy genre really didn't exist until, except in the Tolkien world, except for a few writers, and it certainly didn't have the cachet it does now. There was no young adult fiction in fantasy to speak of. A few famous stories, but not very much at all, and certainly not whole rows of bookshelves in the stores of all these fantasy writers. And it's mind-boggling to me because I always felt I was so damned alone, and I begged the Del Rey company for years to find some more writers, for God's sake. I said, it's got to be somebody else that can write these books and sell them that you can do well with. But it was a problem really all the way, not through the 90s, but well into the 90s before that whole precept started to change. So when I got to the point where I had done, I don't know, maybe not even 20 of those books, but enough that I was really starting with running with the Demon, the Word and Void series to feel like I needed to break off and do something else. But the publishers, in their kind and gentle way, said, but we're selling so many. And me, in my greedy, gluttonous way, said, oh, let's keep writing them then. Yeah, I didn't really feel the same way about those books that I do now with Child of Light, because here I have a new series I'm starting. It's not going to go on that long, but it's still a series. And it's written in the first person, which I never do. And it's involving some issues that I have not tackled before about family and about the relationships in families and how everybody in families that are under any kind of stress, they all lie because that's the way they survive. And I'm a big fan of the idea that closeness in families means real trouble for just about everybody in some ways if you're not careful. So I really
let me ask you about Child of Light series. What did you deliberately go in to write it in first person?
Yes.
So you were like, I'm going to write a series in first person. Where did that decision get made, and what was your
I read a lot of young adult fiction, and they do first person all the time. And I got involved with a couple of writers whose work I admired, and they get me interested. And I thought, I wonder if I should try that. And what I thought about it was, there's an immediacy to the first person narrative that does not exist in third person narrative. There's also the problem that if it's being narrated by somebody, you're not going to be able to kill them off in all likelihood. And those who have done so poorly, I would like to say, out there.
There's one, I don't want to spoil it, but I can't say which one it is, but there's one that I think is just great.
So I don't know, I don't like to talk about what other people have done because everybody makes their own choices, and they're doing the best they can, just like I'm doing the best I can, and we're all trying to get through. But I think now that I've done it, I'm starting to feel the urge to go back to third person. And maybe some of it's probably, unfortunately, the fact that I'm pushing, a big decade, and I'm not going to be able to write for another, maybe another 10, 12 years if I'm lucky. Otherwise, I'll be turning out dribble. But you know, you feel those doors start to close, and you realize you have to make good choices, and you have to pay attention to what is important to you, because you don't have those 50 years ahead of you where you're going to be able to do anything you want to, anytime you want to. Not true for you, luckily, but very true for me.
Do you feel like you have a sense of stages in your own career, in your own work, now that when you look back at it? Do you feel like, oh, you know, there's where I figured out this piece of my writing, or anything like that?
I'm just trying to remember what my childhood was like. I can't remember that anymore. You know how everything runs together after a while, in a way, and the things you think you remember either they disappear. I just had a class reunion that I did not go to, 60 years, and those people are elderly. And not only that, but I looked at the photos, I don't know a single person. And there's so little I can remember about that whole period of my life. And for me, and this is true, you just wrote about my childhood in school, in A Deadly Education. That was my, you know, I spent most of my time as a kid trying not to get beat up too often, and trying to find ways to get, you know, protectors or friends or whatever to get through school. Because it was a rough time for me, at least in a lot of ways. And I always thought I was kind of a squirt kid who couldn't do very much, and I had a pretty good mouth on me, which got me in trouble all the time. So, you know, get along with the other kids. Nah,
I can't imagine that, Terry. I cannot imagine you have a mouth on you.
It was unfortunately true, and it didn't endear me to anybody. See, Naomi seems like such a nice person. I'm sure she didn't have any of these problems.
No, in school, I also, you know, that's obviously one of the things that I'm channeling in it. Which is, but I, you know, I do think, right, in retrospect, right, that so many of us, we are all, in a certain sense, we all remember misery from those years to some extent, because the miserable bits are the pieces that stick in our minds.
They do.
But I was the nerd who like went to the library and didn't have any friends, you know, because I wasn't quite ready to sort of do that. I was so deeply engaged in like the life of imagination in my own head. And it was so much more exciting than the actual real world, you know, and yeah, so and I hadn't found my people, you know. It took me until college
to learn, probably,
until and actually the internet, you know. It's like when I found sort of online fanfic fandom, that was my tribe, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, and now it's easy to be friends with people, and but before then it was quite hard for me. But even if you have what looks from the outside like a charmed middle school or high school experience, I think it's still deeply traumatic. It's a deeply difficult time of becoming. And it is, you know, what I am trying to do, obviously, with Deadly Education, with Scholomance. One of the things is that the sort of the amplification and resonance of those experiences, right, of that time, that because I think it lives in all of us. And so, you know, it's interesting because I often get asked, is this young adult? Is this YA?
I get asked that too.
Right, because I'm like, maybe, yes, you tell me, right? To me, that difference, obviously that difference is all about marketing. And so you know, I feel like it's not kind of a question for me, but for me, I think that it's a story because those experiences are so deeply in us, and because we are all still trying to grow up, right? We're all still on our way. You know, that I still think that it resonates no matter how old you are. You know, that experience, and you know, that I think even if you've never had it, I don't know, I suspect everybody has walked into a cafeteria alone, looked around and been like, who am I going to sit with?
Who am I going to sit with? Sure.
And
Sure.
and who, you walk into a party, who am I going to talk to? Everybody else seems to know everybody else, and I'm
Mhm.
right. And that sort of sense of exposure, right? That sense of anxiety and exposure feels in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to get eaten by a monster. And so
It
literally,
is.
right?
You feel marginalized because you do not think yourself the equal of all the more popular, you're sure are more popular and talented people that are around you, or the other kind that you don't want to have anything to do with anyway. And everything becomes a polarization based upon your images of how things are. When I started out in this business in the 70s, one of the first things that Lester Del Rey, my editor, said to me was, when I said, I think I should go out on tour, go to some bookstores. And he says, you're not ready. And I said, why am I not ready? He says, you haven't written enough. He says, you stick to writing books for a half a dozen and then we'll talk. Because he felt, and then he went on later to say, the problem is, Terry, is that the author should never come between the book and himself. And I thought, what is he talking about? But he believed that. He said, it's the audience and the book that belong together. You are part of the assembly system. That's
Right.
how it should be viewed. And I thought, well, this is cold ass is what this is. I don't particularly like this idea. And it's so
funny. It's funny because actually, that is how I experienced books as a child, as a young reader.
yes.
For a long time, it never occurred to me, like literally into high school, author was not a career choice, right?
Yes.
It didn't occur to me that books just sort of appeared magically, right? They just showed up on the shelf. I think I remember like, I think I was 13 when I first started reading a series that hadn't been completed. And I remember being like, what do you mean it's not done?
What am I buying into?
Yeah. Actually, no, you know what it is? I remember it. I remember going to the library and there was a new Alana book on the shelves. And this just like blew my mind. I was like, what, there's a new one? There's one that didn't exist before. And I still didn't actually realize that Tamora Pierce was an actual human being somewhere. That still didn't fully register in my head for a long time because the book, it was me and the book. And that was very much about my experience.
Did you know any authors before you were published?
Did I know? I mean, I knew my husband, who
Yes.
published many short stories. I knew, who did I knew some people. I knew some writers who were previously novelists who were working in Hollywood at the time.
Oh, really? Okay.
By then. But also, when Temeraire was published, I'd finished my graduate degree. I was already.
You were far away from where I was.
Well, and my agent, my wonderful agent, was a guest at my wedding, several years before I had a book to show her, because
that helps.
She was my husband's first boss, Cynthia Manson. She was the editor of Asimov's before. And in fact, it's funny because at the time I sent her Temeraire, she no longer represented. She didn't represent any science fiction or fantasy.
Yeah.
She basically only handled thrillers. And so she was doing me a very great favor when she was like, sure, I'll take it and I'll hand it to Betsy Mitchell at Del Rey, who I've known for 20 years. And, we'll see. Because I was just like, is this a thing? Can we sell this thing? And she, got me the answer of yes. And how about you write 2 more? And so yeah, I had a very strange, it was not a typical publishing experience.
I didn't know anybody in the business, period, when I submitted Sword of Shannara, and I had never met, I had never had any writing classes. I had no idea what I was getting into, and no formal training in writing beyond the typical English courses they were teaching us back then, because the whole landscape in terms of literature and your exposure to it was entirely different than what it is now. Now it is much more, people teach my books. I never cease to be amazed, because, this was the kind of book when I wrote it that people basically steered clear of. And unless they were young, and they thought it was all young adult stuff anyway, so it was harmless, obviously. But it was such a different attitude to have that, and really the coming awake to how the system works and how writers function and how they interact with each other was an eye-opener for me. And in many ways, I value those relationships that I made early on in my writing career. I learned so much that I would never have known otherwise, because most of the writers were very friendly and ready to talk to me about how to do things and tell me things that I didn't know. And I always felt so stupid, but on the other hand, I felt grateful that they were willing to do the talking about and explanations.
Yeah.
How much do you guys think about paying it forward? I mean, Terry, you had a lot of help, and Naomi, you knew some people.
Well, occasionally some really nice writer that I really liked growing up will blurb one of my books, and I still remember getting your blurb and being like, oh, Terry, right, and that's a thing that I think you do try to sort of to hope that you try to kind of amplify voices that you find, and try to sort of talk about the process,
Yeah.
and be welcoming to new writers,
Yeah.
and try to share advice and talk openly about the challenges in the process, and sort of, one of the things that I feel like is quite important is sort of demystifying it, is saying, that it's just, and talking also about, the early work, and being like, nobody starts out writing the best thing they're ever going to write. And you can't always write the very best thing you're ever going to write. And you just have to keep doing it. That to be a writer means what you need to do to be a writer is to write.
I always think about the person who does write the very best thing they're ever going to write right away. What do they do with the rest of their lives?
Right.
Seems kind of a futile experience at that point to go on.
Well, but then the truth will be, right, then the other piece to think about is that whatever you write that you think is the best thing, other people
aren't going to see it. Yeah.
Right. Other people won't agree. And no book is the best book for every person. No. Right. You can
character is the best character either.
No.
They'll be surprised. It's always surprising when somebody says they love thus and so a character, and you think, I barely remember that character, and you really like that character that much. Well, all right. But there is that anomaly to the whole process, that you spend all this time investing yourself in these characters, and you naturally form attachments to one or the other, and somebody comes along and says, yeah, they were okay, but the one who really interested me was Joe Blow over here, who did nothing, much of anything. But that's just the way that this is.
Right. Yeah, because that's, what I was saying about more than at least 50% of the experience is the reader. And so you don't always necessarily know, and you don't know what's going to speak to a reader, what's going to come alive for them, what's going to sing to them. And the more real, the more fleshed out, the more opportunities your stories provide to a reader to love them, I feel like, the better, right? And being open to that is.
I remember in the old days when I was doing a lot of lecturing on this sort of thing, and some classwork and that sort of thing that I've now all behind me, that I would talk all the time about the fact that you should never forget that the readers should be allowed to participate in the process. So don't describe everything. Don't make it all, cookie cutter and word perfect and so forth. Give them a chance to imagine what the characters are like. Give them a chance to picture how they look. You don't have to do all that. because engaging in the book means being part of it. And doing that is in a situation where you're invited to step in and picture how things are and to imagine how they would happen and so forth. And it's too much of what I read doesn't do that. They just try to cover every single base that's in there. And I feel like that's always kind of a reader cheater thing that writers should avoid.
Yeah.
Of course, it makes it easier on me if I don't have to do all that stuff either.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's probably some happy medium, right? You want to give people very often what you want to give, I find, and what I sort of try more consciously to give is the sort of the flavor, right? Some sort of sense of you know, something that kind of creates atmosphere and suggests the mood and suggests you know, sort of like instead of a detailed line drawing, you want to give some cool big brush strokes that then help guide the eye, help guide the mind and imagination, and sort of play with the level of description in that sense.
Actually had somebody come up once to me and say, how come you never write about gay people? And I say, what are you talking about? What makes you think I haven't? He says, well, I've read your books and I never saw anything. And I said, well, I think you should go back and read it again. You're not looking at all the language. And eventually that worked to a big extent. But part of the problem was, when, at least when I was starting out, that this wasn't the subject matter that it is right now. The question of having what your sexual persuasion is. But now it's out there, and we have all kinds of people that are open about it that wouldn't have been open about it before. So it's not quite the big thing it once was, but it irritates the bejesus out of me when somebody comes up and says, oh, you never write about Black people. And I say, how do you know that? And they said, well, you don't call them Black. And I said, do I have to say a person is Black in order for that description to perhaps suggest the idea? And if it gets to that point, I think, well, boy, I sure missed the boat on that one. But I feel like, you know, fantasy particularly requires such an engagement in the part of the readers that they are able to step in and put down the picture that they want to see happen. And they aren't locked into something like they would be in, you know, in a different kind of genre fiction. That would
and you know, look, I feel like the other pieces, right, that you know, it comes out, there is, right, this extremely sort of, you know, the sort of, when you look at the tradition, the original traditions that it's coming from, there is just, you know, an intense sort of focus on whiteness, and it is the sort of this dominant thing. And so for many readers, it, you know, that it is something that you do in a way have to specify, because otherwise, I remember, you know, sort of like sometimes even when you do tell readers, I know some authors, you know, there was like the issues with whitewashing of covers for a long time,
right?
Where if you didn't sort of aggressively specify, people would just assume, you know, and assume to the point that they would override descriptions that you actively did give them sometimes,
right?
To sort of see characters as white in their own minds.
That's a good point.
You know, and so white, straight, right, you know, there's that sort of the defaults, the sort of unmarked was marked in a way,
right?
And so I feel like you know, it's not necessarily, I do feel like it's reasonable to say, you know, that it needs to be it had to be fairly aggressively marked, and possibly so still does, to kind of overcome that. Although, you know, now, fortunately, I'm so obviously the real solution for that is to increase the diversity of voices in the community. And I do feel like, thankfully, that is really happening.
I was going to say that is certainly happening, because when I look at PW these days and see who's writing, I don't know anybody. I don't know any of them. And they all have names that suggest, or many of them have names that suggest that their ethnicity is entirely different than the straight white person.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging. And I've read some of the work, but I run into people here and there at author signings. It's where I get to say hello and learn who they are and what they're writing and so forth. And that opens you up your mind a little bit, but you can't always tell from reading the book who's actually doing it. You can imagine it maybe from the nature of their names that sounds like something Indian or Pakistani or whatever, but you just don't know. And in the long run, I don't know if they're writing about a particular culture and that is what is at the heart of what they're doing, then it becomes important. Otherwise, I just want them to tell me a good story. I want them to take me away and show me something that is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that's obviously, that's what, right, that you need more voices. The more voices you have, the greater diversity of voices, the greater diversity of sources that you draw on, the more wondrous you get, the more wondrous journeys you get to take. And that's why it's so important. It's so important for it to be for the sort of the kind of gatekeeping, because I do think, right, one of the difficulties about any kind of industry, about any sort of creative industry, right, that has gatekeeping, is that the gatekeeping is there to deal with just the quality level. I one of my early internships in college was reading the slush pile, and it's really hard to find voices, but it is very easy, I think, for a lot for people to find and want something that is still comfortingly familiar, right? And feel like, and for a long time, I think people sort of had the mistaken idea, which it seems strange to me, especially in fantasy, right? Where to me, the joy of fantasy, the pleasure of fantasy is finding somebody, being with a character, being in a world that is so distinctly different. Right? But there was definitely a sense, and I think a sort of business sense in publishing, that you had to give people characters that were very like them in some way, or very like a kind of default generic sort of hero figure, in order for them to be able to engage, in order for them to go with you. And that and that's not actually true. I think that you need, and so it becomes quite important, I think, to have that broadening of your base of what you're looking for, and because otherwise it does end up being the same thing, right?
It does.
I remember a few years when I was hold on, Sean. I remember a few years back when a certain member of the writing community made a very broad statement that said that if you're not this person and you're not of this sexual or ethnic persuasion, you can't write about these people. And I always thought, this is total BS. You can write about anything if you put yourself into it. You don't necessarily have to govern it with a fine-tooth comb so that you get everything down right. You can do it in the general sense and accomplish something also. And I've always felt like if you're a writer, you should be able to write about anything. You should be able to find a way to write about anything.
Right.
And
no, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree about that. But the problem is when it's only like one group that actually gets the podium, right?
Yeah. Right.
And then that group, right, when it's only white writers and then they're writing about everybody else, that is, that's the real problem to me.
Right.
The problem is not that, if you're white, you can't write about other ethnicities. If you're straight or cis, you can't write about other characters. Right. It's that you have to have writers and you have to have people in publishing, right, behind the scenes of all different, you need that diversity top to bottom. And
that's what I was going to say. I was going to jump in and say that I feel like your guys' publisher in particular has done a very good job in the last 3, 4, maybe 5 years of welcoming new voices that are not that white male, and and that gives me encouragement for the future.
Yeah, I think they've shown this to be true about their commitment over and over again over the past few years. And that's what I want to see more of, and what I've been whining around about since the 90s, about exploring other avenues instead of being locked into this idea that we have to have the same thing happen over and over again. And I think maybe we're going to see more of that. I don't know. We could go on about this for a long time. I have a feeling we're going to need 3 hours for this.
Right. So well, I love where all that went. I should probably start asking some questions maybe, and maybe we need to set up another Zoom event with you guys here in a week or two.
I'm about to go on tour, so there's nothing is happening for me for the next
Terry too. Terry's going to be hot on your heels out there on the road.
Yeah, a week behind you.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna jump in here real quick and ask some questions if you guys are okay with that.
Yes, please.
Let's see here. Let's see. I'm trying to find some questions that actually will be good for both of you. Some of you guys, Terry said something earlier about, I don't have 50 years left to write, but which I think is a funny comment by the way, Terry, because we all know you're going to live forever, and that's fine. But for both of you, I mean, you both started off writing these major kind of epic series that were multi-volume, and this anonymous attendee basically asks, if you both had an extra 50 years, what would you write? Like, would you be going, back to Temeraire and back to Shanra every once in a while, or will it always be something new going forward?
For me, it's going to be something new. Yeah. I mean, it may be that at some point, every once in a while, some past story that I've written will come back to me. And I'll start something, but in fact, I've literally structured my next contract. So I have 2 years of writing time, and I'm going to write the whole thing as a single piece. And then we'll figure out where the right sort of breakup points are, to publish it. But I felt that was what I learned from writing Temeraire, is that I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to do a multi-volume series again. Effectively, for me, I want the whole story in my head to a certain extent before I sit down and start writing. But that's because for me, it's getting to the end of that story is incredibly motivating, because I don't know what it's going to be, and that way I want to find out.
I think I'll probably hedge on this one, because I have a couple opportunities to do some different things, and I'm not really committed at this point, except that I know I'm going to do 4 books in the Child of Light series, and 3 of them are almost done. So I will only have 1 more to write. After that, I've got several ideas, and I just don't know yet which way I'm going to jump. So I don't know.
All right, it's like a game time decision. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you both on the hot seat here. Patricia
Thanks.
Wright. It's not me, actually. It's Patricia. It's all Patricia. She asks, is there a particular Terry Brooks book that is a good introduction to his writing? But I'm going to flip this a little bit and have Naomi recommend a Terry Brooks book, and then I'm going to have Terry recommend a Naomi Novik book.
I'm sorry, I've got to go with Elfstones. It was my first one. I know that Sword of Shannara is the first one, but for me, Elfstones, and I'm not going to spoil it because this person is, has not yet read it. And I feel like there's parts of it that were that live in my mind rent free, as they say, and that have stayed with me, since I was, I think, like 9, reading it for the first time. And just such the magic is so cool, yeah. So that's me. That's my recommendation.
Go ahead, keep going. You're doing great. I'm gonna cheat on this a little bit, because I have a difficult time choosing in the Naomi Novik books. I like all of them, and the first one of each is the one that always grabs you and holds you, and you always remember, it seems like, as time goes by. So I would say in the first book in any of her 3 sets that are the mainstays are worth the effort. And I think she's the kind of writer that once you get involved, you're going to want to get involved all the way with all of her books and see and eventually read them all. I don't feel that way about too many writers, but in her case, I definitely do.
Good answer. All right. Lyric Patel asks, a question for both of you. Out of all your books, which character do you feel reflects you the most?
Yeah, right. I'll do this one real quick. None. But you know, obviously Ben Holiday in Magic Kingdom for Sale was based on my character, except I don't box. And he's closest to who I was back then when I was a lawyer and when I was just starting out and I was struggling a lot with my life. So probably that one.
Yeah, I can't really say. I don't think any of them. I think they have elements of me. Some of them have some feelings that I've had. But I wouldn't say that any of them are really me. Yeah.
That's a tough one.
No,
Yeah.
it's an interesting question, but no, I don't think any of them. I mean, obviously, to some extent, they're all me, right? Because they all came out of me.
They are. Yeah.
And so, you know, there's nothing else there. There's nobody else behind them. But and maybe Miriam from Spinning Silver a little bit, but not, you know, she's a little. She's somebody I would like to imagine being in her circumstances. Maybe. I feel like that would be kind of what I would say. I'm not sure if I would be, but
little wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
You know, I know.
Here's a question that's directed at Naomi, but I feel like it's kind of pertinent to Terry a little bit too here. The question is, Naomi, we retell any more fairy tales? Now, when I read Child of Light, it felt very Spinning Silver uprooted to me. The magic of the prose and like the story that Terry was telling felt very fairy tale-ish to me. You know, do you guys, I mean, do you have any intentions of doing something else like you did earlier, Naomi?
I mean, you know, I can certainly imagine doing it. It's just going to be about what comes. You know, for me, obviously, I like to say that all my work is in conversation with different things. So Uprooted and Spinning Silver were both very closely in conversation with a whole variety of fairy tales. Scalamont's is in conversation with the Scalamont's folk legend, which is itself, it's not a fairy tale in exactly the same way, but it's kind of fairy tale-ish. And I think Folly probably less so. Folly is kind of turning into this kind of sprawling magic fantasy epic kind of thing, more than fairy tales in my head. But I think it'll have certain kinds of fairy tale like qualities. But I mean, I could certainly imagine doing it. You know, Spinning Silver and Uprooted were both, you know, it's not just that they're fairy tales, they're also family stories, right? They're also drawn from my family, from stories that were transmitted to me in early childhood and the images from childhood that I was sort of reaccessing at the time that my own daughter had just been born and was very young. And so it's that combination that I think might be the piece that it's less that it's just specifically a fairy tale. It's that as well. And I don't know, you know, I don't know what I'm going to get. Sometimes you just sit down at the computer and you see what comes out.
Yep.
I think we both write fairy tale types of stories. We're looking for those ingredients in everything we do, even if they're couched in different terms, with different settings and different types of characters and different backlays to the story. But they're all pure fantasy. And my theory is that we both write about what we see in the world and what we think is true about real life. And we couch it in fairy tales terms, because I find people are more willing to listen to you go on about such things if you put it in outside of the normal place that you expect to see it. And I have written a lot about the environment, but I never have written about the environment in a way that suggests the book is about the environment. That was true in the Heritage series. So I think this is the way that we're both very comfortable with our work. And I'm sure what else we do down the line is going to be in keeping with what we've done up to this point.
Yep.
Yep.
I got a really good question here from Leaf or Leif, who's 12. I love this. I love this. How long does it take you to write a book?
It takes me 4 weeks and 1 year. The 4 weeks of like intense concentrated writing interspersed with like life happening. You know, more broadly, it's hard for me to say because I tend to be a boom and bust. I don't have like, I'm not sitting there plugging away, getting 1,000 words a day typically. When I am in writing mode, I can write, 30,000 words in a week. And then there can be long periods where it's, 100 words a day, 20 words a day, negative 50 words a day, right? And ultimately, but even in the times when I'm not writing, the book is gestating in my head.
Right.
And my first books, when I first started writing, were written in an absolute frenzy from start to finish, in like, I think I wrote the first Temeraire book in about 3 months, the first draft, because I was absolutely terrified that I wasn't going to finish it. That I get bored and wander off to something else. And so I really was just doing nothing but that. I had like 10,000 word days, and I don't necessarily recommend this as a way of doing things. Your wrists, I have tendonitis in my wrists now, possibly related to this, but that was how I needed to do it. Now I don't need to do it the same way. And now I kind of wish that I could, but I'm a mom and there's lentils to pick out of the ashes like Cinderella.
And we all have to operate within our the purviews of what life allows for us to do, and it changes all the time. You're not in the same place for 50 years or whatever if you're a writer. And the other part of this is that Naomi just mentioned, and I thought about right away, is that our office is in our head. And it's not like you sit down and you say, well, I think I'll think about this for a while. For the most part, you're always thinking about it, and it pops up when it wants to pop up, and you find answers and questions and so forth all the time, and they come unbidden. So you have to be ready to remember and act on them at the point that they surface. And so the writing of the book is the mechanical part of it, but it's also a creation to fruition of the words and the ideas and the characters that we've had in our heads for a while and we're thinking about.
Yeah.
So it's not as easy as saying, well, it starts here and ends here. It starts and ends, starts and ends, starts and ends over a period of time, and that can vary so much.
Yeah. No, in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I started Scholomance. I wrote the first like 12,000 words while I was in the middle of spinning silver. I was on vacation,
Yep.
On the beach with a laptop. That's where the first, and then I just had to stick it in a folder and finish the book that I was contracted to write.
I think the fastest book I ever wrote, Naomi, was Child of Light. I wrote that in 4 months in the midst of COVID because I was so depressed and pissed off and upset about everything that I just decided to write this book that was going to have this engaging character whose whole life was different than when they thought it was. And I just sat down and, like you say, I started writing and I couldn't stop. It just came to me, and I wish every book worked that way, but they don't. And so you can't make a plan that says, well, I'll take a month or two and get the first 20 chapters done. I'll write 1,000 words a day. Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Sometimes it's that 100 words you were mentioning.
Right. And I do think one thing that I will say for Leaf, if you want to write, if you want to write books, the most important thing is just to sit down and write a lot. I'm not always working on my book, but I am typically write something every single day. Sometimes it's fanfic, sometimes it's I've opened something else and I'm noodling on it. But writing is always happening, and I think that's a really key piece. Just do a lot of writing, because it's muscle. You build muscle, and after you've written 10 novels, it gets a lot easier. I no longer fear, oh, am I going to be able to finish this book? Oh, am I going to be able to find the ending of this story? I know that I will be able to. That you gain the confidence of doing that by doing it, and you gain the ability to do it by doing it.
You learn the terrain.
No.
You learn how everything works, and then you become more and more comfortable with it with the passing of time if you're successful with your early efforts and carry it forward.
Yeah.
All right. How about one more question? How's that sound?
Sure.
We have so many questions. It's incredible. You guys brought a lot of people in here, but like I said, after tour, maybe we'll try to schedule something that's good for everybody. And then I'll talk a little bit about your books that are coming out. But I kind of want to go back. There's a question here about going back into the history of when you guys started reading. I mean, Naomi mentioned Elfstones. Terry's been very vocal about the books that he really loved when he was growing up. But Nicholas Cramp asks, do you remember any books that stand out of your reading history across the years, like first reads of a genre, really impactful for you personally? What would those books be? I like the impactful part to that question. What books really were impactful for you?
There are many. I would say I remember the first Alana book, Alana the First Lioness, was one of the very early ones, and shortly after that, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin, whose work has continued. That's another one of those stories, another one of the a story that her work is stuff that I go back to a lot, and I find new things in it every time I return. Robin McKinley, especially the Forgotten Beasts of Eld and the Damar books. Patricia McKillip, who we lost so recently, is deep in my heart. And McCaffrey, the Pern books. I think, and Tolkien. Tolkien is in a different category for me because that was something that I did not find on my own. My mother read Tolkien to me, and when I was very young. I remember we read The Hobbit when I was something like 5 years old, and so those are the things that I think have stayed with me.
I didn't read fantasy at all growing up because I grew up in an age when boys read science fiction. So I spent my junior years, right when I had free reading time, reading all the old science fiction writers. Before that, I read a lot of dog and horse stories. Now we're talking, 6 through 8 through 7, 9, something like that. Black Stallion.
Yes, the Black Stallion books. I had all of those.
I mean, I remember those books like they were yesterday. They made a huge impact beyond storytelling. And then later on, I got enamored with Tolkien, not Tolkien, enamored with, well, I can't think of the writer's name here in my debilitated state. The writer from Alabama that wrote the stories about the Snopes and the Comptons. William Faulkner. I was enamored of his storytelling style, which was difficult to follow in a lot of ways and extremely depressing in many ways too, but they felt so true about the way that people reacted to each other. And in the midst of those stories was the short long story called The Bear, which I still to this day remember, where the bear comes up against the hunter with the two dogs and the battle that ensues between them. Those kinds of books really impacted me in ways that nothing else did.
All right, I think I just realized I owe people a look at some upcoming artwork that we all have going. So I almost forgot that. We have a couple more minutes. Are you guys, can you stay on a couple more minutes?
Yeah. Sure,
I have a couple more. I think I've got like 4 before I turn into a pumpkin.
Okay, 4 minutes. Okay, I'm going to share these. I'm going to start with Naomi's because one, it's closer to the book's closer to being done. So Grim Oak Press is producing a beautiful omnibus edition of In His Majesty's Service, which is the first 3 books in the Temeraire series. We will be doing the following 2 omnibuses also.
Sure.
Which means Naomi needs to come up with very cool titles for the second omnibus and the third omnibus too. So be thinking about that, Naomi. I'm going to share my screen here. The artist that Naomi and I have been working with is named Daniel Govar. He's amazing to work with. I've had so much fun with him. And Naomi's been able to see everything along the way, which is always fun because her emails back are so squeaky. They're just like, this is so great.
So you know, I met Daniel in fandom. Like he made some Temeraire fan art early on. That was just blew my mind. It was so amazing. And I have one of his pieces up on my wall, actually, not in this room, or I'd show you, but
yeah.
And it's just fantastic.
So I'm actually going to show the cover because I don't want to spoil some of the things that he has working with the interiors, that he's still tweaking some of the interiors, so I don't want to put out some, but this one is done. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And there we go. Can you guys see that?
That's great.
Yeah.
Look at that. That's terrific.
Now, this is my business partner, Becky's favorite cover that we've done on Grim Oak so far. She just loves it because there's so much to look at.
There is.
Naomi, do you want to talk about this at all?
You know, the pieces, obviously, the core of the Temeraire books is the relationship between Lawrence and Temeraire, and that connection between them. And so one of the things that I love about this is that you do have that sense of the intimacy there, but at the same time, this also conveys the other key piece of the Temeraire series, which is the sense of these dragons as almost sort of parallels to the sailing ships of the time, the sense of crews working on them, the sense of just the scale and how they were, you know, and how Temeraire himself is almost a place as well as a person, so that he's sort of a living place for his crew. And you get this sense, I think, in this, of the sort of the life of the aviators, and this sort of, you get these hints in the sort of small details just everywhere. And so I really love this one.
Yeah.
So is that supposed to be Lawrence reading to Temeraire?
Yes, that's Lawrence reading to Temeraire.
Yeah, I picked up on that right away. That's a terrific drawing.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. So I'll be posting this up on the website soon to share it with people. And I think Naomi and I are going to do a larger reveal of the book on October 3rd, if memory serves. So I'll be posting details about that as well. And then Terry and I are actually also in the middle of artwork duties together at Grim Oak, and we're working on the Druid of Shanra right now with an artist who I couldn't believe that was available, named Lishon Yin. And this is his work on the Druid of Shanra. And so this is what the Shanra fans have to look forward to. Temeraire fans get to look forward to something, and the Shanra fans get to look forward to something. Clearly Walker Bow. I'm going to tone down his ears, I think, a little bit. I don't think his ears are that pronounced in the book, but yeah, we're pretty close to this one being done too. So
Yeah.
Walker Bow and Quickening and Pael, the assassin Pael in Eldwist, the city of Eldwist. So Terry, you want to say anything about this?
Nope, I like it. I think it's good. You know, it's not how I pictured the characters exactly, but that's what I like about it, is that I think it opens up the doors for other people to think about the characters in the way that appeals to them and decide if this is how they envisioned them when they read the books or not. But I think it's a good representation of the city and of the atmosphere that existed at the time that this was told.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
All right. So there's your reveal, everybody. I will be talking a lot. I'll be talking about, I will definitely be talking a lot about this online and in the following weeks, but thank you for taking the time and doing, watching it.
Yeah.
And then, so, you know, in closing here, I'm going to give you guys final words. Well, not final words. I'm going to talk a little bit about Child of Light and about the Golden Enclaves, but
yes, I will let you do that, and my final words will be bye.
All right, you got to go. Sorry.
Yes,
Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Terry. It is, as always, a delight to hang out and chat with you.
And great fun.
You know, and get to mine your wisdom.
I'll see you in New York, and I'll mine you some of your wisdom.
Excellent.
Thank you both. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. The Golden Enclaves comes out Tuesday in a week, and Child of Light is a week after that, or no, Daughter of Darkness is a week after that.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been great. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.